The Glendale Road Church of Christ proudly presents a weekly exploration of the Word of our living God. This is It Is Written with Minister John Dale.
Our study today in the series of Tell Me the Stories of Jesus, as we look at the parables of Christ, is entitled The Parable of the Chief Seats. And we're reading from Luke chapter 14, beginning in verse 7 and going through verse 11. So he told a parable to those who were invited when he noted how they chose the best places, saying to them, "When you are invited by anyone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in the best place, lest one more honorable than you be invited by him, and he who invited you and him come and say to you, 'Give place to this man.' And then you begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down in the lowest place, so that when he who invited you comes, he may say to you, 'Friend, go up higher.' Then you will have glory in the presence of those who sit at the table with you. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted." We want to look today at the subject of humility. And the one who can teach that lesson is the Christ himself. He knows whereof he speaks. He lived a life of humility. He taught great lessons. He practiced what he preached. By way of introduction to the study, we want to look at the Jews who were, according to the earlier verses of Luke chapter 14, they were watching Jesus closely. He astounded them by healing on the Sabbath. Guests began arriving for dinner in the home of a Pharisee, slyly maneuvering around the table for places of honor. So Jesus spoke a parable, that is a table talk, to warn of their unsafe spiritual condition. This is not a lesson on table manners. It goes way beyond that. Jesus took something as common as where you sit at the table in that culture, in that setting, in the home of the Pharisee, and he made a lesson out of it for the people who were vying for position, thinking that greatness comes with which seat you occupy. And Jesus is going to show us that real greatness comes by how you serve, in keeping with the example and teaching of the Christ. The principle of humility is found in this passage as it concludes in verse 11, "For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted." As you look at those other passages that are listed there, what we see is, again, over and over, Jesus saying, if you want to be truly exalted, then you need to humble yourself and become a servant. And the word servant is also translated, sometimes at least, slave. And sometimes the term that's used for slave is galley slave, which is the lowest of the slaves. And so in these passages we'll find, for instance, in Luke 18, where there's a Pharisee and a tax collector who come to the temple to pray. The Pharisee prays thus with himself, "Lord, I thank you that I'm not like other men. I give, I fast, I do this, I do that. It's I. He says, I'm thankful I'm not like this other man." And he's looking at the tax collector, the publican. And then when he finished, the publican, the tax collector, would not so much as lift up his eyes, but smote upon his breast and said, "God, be merciful to me, the sinner." And Jesus said, now that man went to his house justified, not the other. And again he said, he who exalts himself will be humbled or abased, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. If you look in John 13, you find where there is the jockeying for position here. Who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom? I want to be ahead of him. I want to be sitting at this place when you come into your kingdom. And so Jesus, listening to that and knowing their hearts, went and got a basin of water and a towel, and he began to wash the feet of the apostles. teaching them a lesson on humility that would say it's far more important that you serve than it is that you find a place of recognition among the people. If we truly want to be great in the sight of the Lord, we will be serving and serving and serving. Now, that's easy to teach. Just read it right out of the Bible. Anybody nearly can do that. It doesn't take a great deal of gumption to stand in front of a group and to read that and teach that. It's easy to teach. The question is not so much the body of doctrine. It's there and it's available and it needs to be emphasized, but the application is the hard part. To be truly a servant has to do with doing things that will help other people and will glorify God, and you may not ever get any credit for it at all. It's very possible that people will never even know. Perhaps one or two will know, but you won't get your name in the bulletin. You won't get your name called publicly in the assembly. You won't get thank you notes. You won't get accolades. But Jesus said the thing that's important is the serving from the heart through real and true humility. And as you do that, then there are great rewards of fulfillment. And the Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. If you read in Matthew chapter 6 about doing good deeds, doing alms deeds, Jesus said, don't get out and blow the trumpet every time you do something for somebody. Just do it. Do it because you love them. Do it because you love God. Do it because you really want to. And he said, the Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. There's nothing wrong with being in public. He uses in that same narrative the story of one who would pray in public. He said, the right way to pray is not to see if you can get a crowd on the street corner so that you can get some praise from the men. No. He said, you pray, go into your closet or go into the room and shut the door, and the Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. While he's not condemning prayer in public, after all, he prayed in public sometimes. But we have to check our motives. That's the key. Do we have the motives of true humility, a desire to praise the Lord, or are we doing what we do to be seen of others so that they will praise us? Now again, it's easy to teach it. It's easy to read it right out of the text. But there are times we all need to step back and see if we believe what we're teaching. And I say that for my benefit, and I hope it'll help you. Much of my life is very public. In a small community, it is very public. Will I decide to be faithful to the Lord if I'm no longer in the public? We're going to find out. And I hope and pray that each of us, beginning with me, especially me, and including you, that each of us will determine that we will be faithful and that we will serve regardless of the publicity it receives. And if that's what Jesus is teaching here, one of the principles at least that he's teaching, we can learn that, we can do some things with it that will praise him. Let's look at the pathway to humility. The starting point for true humility is what? Self-evaluation. Now, remember, it's not self-degradation. We're not trying to just put ourselves down, thinking that if I say enough bad things about myself, then I will be humble. I read one psychologist's notes on that said, if you continue to put yourself down in the presence of others, instead of having a problem with pride, instead of having the issue of humility in your life that you would seem to have, you have a problem of pride, because you could be saying to the people, I'm so ugly and I'm so bad and I'm so rotten, that you're wanting to generate some kind of response from them that says, oh no, you look pretty. Oh no, you're nice. And that's what you were fishing for all along, was some kind of a compliment. And so what looks like humility can turn out to be pride. So we don't want to be phony, that's for sure. And we do want to be genuine and to be humble, but not degrading of self. Anytime you talk down about yourself, remember you're talking about one of God's creations. You have dignity, you have worth. So don't just run yourself down. But sometimes we'll say things that are perhaps overstatements. We use hyperbole in lots of ways in our lives. And if it teaches a lesson, then fine. But the point is, we need to be sure that we respect ourselves properly, but we don't think too highly of ourselves. Romans chapter 12, verse 3 says that. Now let's notice. As you look at self-evaluation, number one, our physical and bodily weaknesses should keep us humble. Psalm 103, King David is speaking of the human frailty and the dust, he said, that here we are dust. And that there's some things that we can't do, and our bodies begin to wear out. If you look in Ecclesiastes 12, the wise man of the Old Testament speaks about the dimming of the vision and the lack of the teeth and other things that happen to us as we grow older. The bodily weaknesses are going to come along, and they by themselves will teach us some things about humanity and even humility. So what do we do with that? Well, we don't want to overstate it. But man can do many, many things. But mankind cannot do everything. Nobody in here can do everything. But everybody in here can do something. We exaggerate our limitations sometimes. And while it's fine to express those limitations, it's not good to exaggerate them to the point of degradation. Let's learn that we do have some limitations. We even have some that we didn't used to have. As we grow older, we'll have more of those limitations. But what we can do with that is either stop, just quit, give up. That's not the answer. Or we can be thankful to God for what we had and thankful for what we still have, and to rechannel ourselves to usefulness now rather than wish we'd done better when we were 30. Hindsight's 20/20. We can all look back and say, I wish I'd made this decision or that decision. But the point is, here we are alive today. This is today. This is the day the Lord has made. We'll rejoice and be glad in it. But we do have some different circumstances today. And it's okay. If you ever feel like you have just lived out your usefulness and you have nothing left, just call me and I'll let you ride with me one day over to the nursing home. We'll go in and we'll walk around and we'll speak to some people. Some of whom will recognize you or me, and some of whom used to be very close to us who don't know anything about you or me anymore. They can look into the faces of their closest family members whom they have adored through the years and see nobody. See, our bodily limitations are going to cause us to reassess life, and it can bring on a real sense of humility that says, I'm not here to stay, and I need to make the best of today. Seize the moment, carpe diem. Grab today and make the best of it to the glory of God, because this is the day, and I might or might not have another one, but if I do, and time goes on, I'm going to become weaker physically, and I will not be able to do some things later on that I can do today. So I don't want to become depressed over that, and I don't want to become defeated, but I do want to accept the reality that life is moving on, and there are physical limitations, and there will be more if we live. Second, our mental limitations should keep us humble. You say, well, what do you mean? Well, again, nobody can do everything, and everybody can do something. Have you ever been around somebody who had what we call a photographic memory? He could read something and just basically quote it right back to you. I've always kind of admired that. Maybe been just a little bit envious of that. But that's not something that I've been able to do well. But there are other things that I can do. You can ask my wife about how good I am at fixing things at the house. She'll be nice about it, but she'll tell you that I don't fix things much. I'm not a carpenter, I'm not a plumber, and I'm certainly not an electrician. But since I can't do carpentry work in a great way, and I can't do electrical work safely for me or for the ones who are going to use it after I finish with it, or I can't do the plumbing things as fully as I would like to, is there anything that I can do? Oh, yes. I know how to run a vacuum cleaner. And most of us can learn how to do that if we don't already know. That helps. But even outside the home, there are things in society, there are things in business, there's things vocationally and professionally that some can do and do well, and others of us don't have those gifts. We're not trained, or we just don't have the innate abilities to do some of the things that other people do. That's okay. You're made in the image of God. And while you have some limitations, and I do too, let's accentuate the things that are positive that we can do, and then join hands with those who can do other things, and then we make a team. I don't remember the name of the player. I'll try to find it. I have it in my notes, but I can't find it. The fellow who was on the team, the Chicago Bulls basketball team with Michael Jordan, and Michael Jordan scored 58 points that night. And this fellow was not one of the better known players. He was not one of the better players, but he got in the game toward the last because it was so one-sided. The coach knew that the Bulls would not lose the game. So this guy got to play, and he was fouled, and he got one free throw. And so he was interviewed after the game was over, and he says, Michael and I combined for 59 points tonight. I like that. We combined for 59 points tonight. Michael Jordan got 58, this guy got one. But you see, he was part of a team. He couldn't score 58 points. Not many people can score 58 points in a basketball game. It's just pretty almost impossible. But what do? You say, well, I'm not ever going to play the sport again. Even though you have some ability and you can be a team player, and if you're not real good at three-point shots, it could be you can feed the ball to the ones who are. It's a team effort. And in basketball, we realize that. We realize it in other sports. We realize it in the game of life. We realize it at church. Not everybody is an elder. Not everybody is a deacon. Not everybody is a preacher. Not everybody is a teacher in public. Not everybody is a care team leader. But everybody can do something. So if we have limitations physically, yes. Mentally, yes. It's okay as long as we're humble and sincere in trying to serve in the best ways we know how. So give it your best effort, even if it doesn't look like somebody else's effort, or if what you do contributes to the total effort and it ends up that somebody else gets credit for it. That's okay. It's going to happen. And in this church, I've noticed through the years that many of the things that you do, you work hard and you do it, and I get credit for it. I just do. So what do I do with that? I've kind of learned to enjoy it myself. But I can laugh about it, and I can go on with it, because I never will forget the thank you note over at 7 the Poplar. Many years ago, somebody wrote a sweet thank you note and said, I especially want to thank Brother Dale for the food that he brought when I came home from the hospital. Do you think in your wildest imagination that I fixed that food? I just delivered it. I drove it over to the house and took it in, but I didn't prepare the food. I hadn't been in the kitchen all day. I ran into the kitchen and got it and went and delivered it, but I got credit for it. Now, who gets credit at your house? Who gets credit where you go to church? The issue is not who gets credit, as long as we realize the issue is God gets credit. If we're doing what we do for the glory of God, you let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who's in heaven, then the principle that Jesus is teaching here is, yes, you have physical limitations. Yes, you have mental limitations. Number 3, the moral weaknesses and failures should keep us humble, because we are tempted to do the wrong things, to make decisions that will not be pleasing to God. And since we have those tendencies, we have those temptations, and we have those limitations, what can we do about it? Romans chapter 7, Paul said, the good that I would do, I end up not doing it. The evil things that I don't want to do, he said, I end up doing them sometimes. I still think Paul has reference in Romans 7 to his pre-conversion experience, but the principle is true in the lives of Christians as well, because just because you become a Christian, it doesn't mean you don't have any temptations anymore. You do have an avenue of escape from the temptations. You have the help of the Lord in a unique way to get you through those difficult times. But the truly humble person will admit that there are issues in life that are especially tempting. And again, we're different. There's some things that are tempting to you that might not be tempting to me at all. It doesn't make me better than you. It just makes me different from you. There's some things I've never really been tempted to do, so I get no credit for not doing them. I'm just not tempted to do them. I don't want to. But there are other things that are especially tempting to me. The Hebrews writer speaks of the besetting sin. I need to be careful, especially if I know now as a mature adult, I know what my areas of temptation are, then I don't need to place myself in the position to be excessively tempted by those things. I can avoid the appearance of evil. I can abhor that which is evil and cleave to that which is good. For instance, if I have a weakness to alcohol, I've already shown in my life that I might have a weakness to alcohol. I don't need to get a job working in a bar. I think of a lot of reasons you don't need a job working in a bar, but the point is I don't need to surround myself by those things that are especially tempting to me. I have a real weakness for foods, plural. An excessive amount of eating good food. I married a wonderful cook, and she likes to cook, and she cooks good, and I eat good. Okay, is it her fault that I'm overweight? No, it's my fault. It's only my fault. So what do I do about that? Well, I don't need to be where the brownies are with the chocolate icing on them all the time. I don't need to be there. I don't need to choose to be surrounded by candy bars. And I can make a choice sometimes on those things. And I can have some strength to even walk past them and not partake. But some things are especially tempting to you or to me. And if we have the opportunity to avoid contact with those things, or at least diminish the intentional contact around those things, we'll be helping ourselves to avoid the temptations. The other passage is 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 15, where Paul said that he was chief of sinners. Now, as you look at his life, as you read about it, with all of his epistles and all the traveling that he did to preach and all these converts that he could chalk up, you'd say, well, he's not chief of sinners. I'm a lot worse than he is. Sometimes he has reference to his pre-conversion life as he persecuted the church, as he sincerely thought he was doing the right thing by finding those of the way and hailing them and binding them and putting them in prison and consenting to their deaths. Read in the 7th chapter of the book of Acts, where Stephen was stoned to death, and the ones who did the stoning of Stephen laid their garments at the feet of a young man named Saul. And if you read chapter 8, going right on with the same thought, Saul was continuing to breathe out threatenings against the church. And he was committing people to prison, and those who were scattered abroad because of that persecution went everywhere preaching the word. See, Paul now, as a converted, committed child of God, looks back on those pre-conversion days when he thought he was doing right. At least give him credit for having an honest heart. He was just honestly wrong. But he said, I thought within myself I ought to do many things contrary to the name of Jesus of Nazareth. He said, I've lived in all good conscience until this day. Acts 23, verse 1, Acts 26, verse 9. But Paul is now saying, as he looks back on it, Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of whom I'm chief. He appreciated the grace of God. He appreciated the forgiveness of the blood of Christ. King David, Psalm 51, he said in verse 4, "Against thee and against thee only have I sinned and done this evil in thy sight." Well, it really wasn't just against God. If you read the story, you have to think about Bathsheba, and you sure have to think about poor old Uriah the Hittite. And you can also think about the nation of Israel. Think about the little baby, the helpless, harmless little baby. David, what do you mean you've sinned against God and against God only? The magnitude of the sin that David was confessing in Psalm 51 was so overpowering that his point was, that grieves me deeply. And so the moral limitations of life, the things that are tempting for some of us in some areas more than others of us in other areas, the thing that's important is that we realize, number one, we have some bodily, physical limitations. Number two, we have some mental limitations. And number three, we have some moral limitations. These things need to cause us to be truly humble. And as we recognize through true humility our position before God, our humanity, our need for forgiveness and cleansing, our need for help and fellowship to be boosted along the way as we boost others along the way, then we can come and get the basin and the towel and wash feet and be like Jesus. As we conclude, we look at the pattern of humility. Number one, the disciples quarreled about which of them would be greatest in the kingdom. I want to sit here. I want to sit there. Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom? That's fine. That's what the thief on the cross said, and he was dying. But if Peter and Andrew or James or John or Philip or Bartholomew or Thomas or Matthew or James or Thaddeus or Simon and Judas was gone, wanted to sit in a certain place because it would make them look better, because they would feel more exalted, Jesus said, if you exalt yourself, you'll be humbled. If you'll humble yourself, you'll be exalted. And so if you and I can learn to develop humility, we'll be like Jesus. If we don't learn humility, we'll be like the disciples whom he is correcting. So here we find Jesus in the home of a Pharisee, perhaps a prominent Pharisee. It is on the Sabbath day, and he has healed someone. All of these things go together to make a real story. And Jesus uses the setting to teach humility rather than go in and look for position at the table as though you can honor yourself. He said, you take a lower position, and if you are then honored, it will mean more to you. It will be something that will register as a real honor. And so if you and I will serve faithfully, regardless of how much publicity we get for it, just serve faithfully, then we'll be like Jesus. Notice the last statement now. Jesus, who was born in a stable and died on a cross, is our pattern of humility. Neither at his birth nor at his death could he find a more lowly place. Is it wrong to be born under hygienic conditions in a good hospital? No. There's nothing wrong with that. Is it wrong to die, and everybody dies somewhere, some way or the other? Is it wrong to die with the best physicians around you and the best technology? No, it's not wrong. But the issue is humility. As you look at the life of Jesus, he had none of those things when he was born. He's born in a stable. Anybody not know what a stable is? It's where the animals are, and they're smelly, and they're dirty. And Jesus had to be born in a stable because there's no room for him in the inn. He started out humbly. He lived his life. He said, the birds of the air have nests, the foxes have holes. I have nowhere to lay my head. And he comes to the cross to die under the horrible conditions, being spat upon by his enemies, being slaughtered almost to death by the scourging of the Roman soldiers, and then nailed to a cross so that he could die of asphyxiation finally, but he was losing blood and he was in excruciating pain, and this is the Son of God. And he's teaching you and me humility in how he was born, how he died, and everything he did in between. So let's learn to serve. Serve well, serve to be like Jesus, serve to the glory of God, serve to the good of others, and then find the right level of fulfillment in knowing that we identify with Christ with true humility that brings us to wash feet, to serve, and to bless the lives of other people. And thank you for being here today.
This has been It Is Written, a weekly exploration of the Word of our living God with John Dale, minister of the Glendale Road Church of Christ. Please visit us online at glendaleroadchurch.org.